At this time, I'd like to introduce our two hosts. We have Becky Marchant, who is educator and founder of COSI College Fairs. And we also have Elizabeth Berry, Director of Marketing from Peterson's. On behalf of the Navigate 2020 event sponsors, Go to College Fairs, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much again for taking time to present this important information. And whenever you're ready, we can begin.
Great, thank you, Alex. Go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, and I'd just like to say thank you to GoToCollegeFairs. Today we are expected to have nearly 3,000 people on this webinar. So again, as Alex stated, please hold your questions until the end. Our hope is that between the frequently asked questions that we have created at the end of the presentation and in the Q&A, that your question will be answered. Again, let me introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Berry, the Director of Marketing for Peterson's. We help students find, fund, and prep for their educational next steps. And my co-presenter, Becky, is the founder of California Out of State and International College Fairs, as well as being a college counselor and faculty member at University of La Verne in California. So on to the feature presentation. We know why you're all here today, because college is an important and valuable, albeit very expensive, investment. So we're going to share with you basically our financial aid advice from working in this field for decades. So we've already covered in our introductions. We're going to talk about types of financial aid, where to find them, tips for saving money, and creating a balanced college list. We'll also have time, as I mentioned, for frequently asked questions and a little Q&A at the end. Okay, so first thing that I want to talk to you all about is types of financial aid. And it's important to know that not all types of financial assistance are created equally. One of the things that we're going to talk about in this webinar are the different kinds of aids and the benefits and the benefits of each, and then also things to think about each. There are some negatives with some of them as well. So, but the first thing that I want you guys to know is that if you are, I know that probably some students are out there, probably some parents, probably some guidance counselors. The most important thing is to always fill out the FAFSA. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that is so important. So the FAFSA basically determines your eligibility for federal student loans. Now, federal student loans are usually more favorable than private student loans for a couple of reasons. One is they're backed by the federal government. The other is that they're usually a fixed interest rate. And generally the terms with these loans are just more favorable for students than private student loans. So this is kind of the first thing, that FAFSA basically allows students to be eligible for federal aid. The second reason is that the student, once you fill out the FAFSA, students will get a student aid report, which basically estimates a family's, excuse me, I apologize, provides the estimated family contribution, the EFC, and individual colleges and universities will use that EFC to decide what sort of either merit or need aid that they will provide. I apologize, just need aid. The one thing that students and parents have asked me in the past couple of weeks is, regarding COVID-19. The reason I bring this up is because when you fill out the FAFSA, you are using your, basically your tax return from the previous year. And for many families, their earned income is going to be less this year than it was last year because they may have lost income because of a job loss. So what students are going to have to do, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is once they fill out the FAFSA and get their estimated family contribution, when they receive a financial aid package from the college or university, they're going to have to advocate for themselves and let colleges and universities know that there has been a change in their family income. And we'll talk about that just a little bit later. So loans are the first kinds of financial aid. And I think we all know that loans are basically money that is given to students with the expectation that it will be paid back with interest. Again, the federal student aid is always preferable because it's federally backed and it usually has more favorable terms to students and families. Students can get loans. Families can also apply for loans as well. Okay. Grants, I want to go over. Grants it's a little bit of a misnomer because grants are essentially scholarships. Grants are money that does not need to be paid back. Another reason why students should always fill out the FAFSA is that they are automatically eligible for Pell Grants, and they don't need to do anything additional to apply for those other than fill out the FAFSA. Okay, so on to scholarships. So scholarships kind of come in two forms: institutional aid and private aid. So institutional aid is aid that comes from a specific college or university. And this can be based on either need or merit or both. But I'll use the example of a student applies to the University of Arizona and they send in their FAFSA along with their application. And when the student is presented with an acceptance, they will also get a financial aid package. Now, within that, the financial aid package may include things like federal loans that they're eligible for, work study, but it also may include scholarships. And again, these may be need-based or merit-based. Becky's going to talk a little bit later about how to maximize some of those things. Now, the one thing that I want to mention today, again, we talked about COVID-19, is many families may have lost income from their tax return from 2019 may be very different from what it is today in 2020. And in these instances, what students and their families need to do is to directly reach out to the financial aid office and let them know what the changes in their family income are. That is the only way that universities and colleges will know that they may need to adjust the award. So in this instance, the families and the students that are really going to benefit the most are the ones who are actively self-advocating. There's no way to go back and change your information on the FAFSA. You have to use your 2019 returns. So if you have a change in situation from your previous year in terms of your family income, I strongly, strongly encourage you to reach out to each and every financial aid office that you've applied to, and let them know of your change in situation. I also know that many colleges and universities are foreseeing that happening. So We may see some proactive measures in the market in terms of colleges and universities factoring that in and providing additional aid for certain income levels. They may be expecting that and creating a little bit more cushioning in terms of the amount of awards that they can provide. I know that some colleges and universities are actively calling upon alumni to help sort of supplement tuition for this particular year because endowments have fallen a bit. But again, I just can't reiterate enough, talk to the Office of Financial Aid if you have a change in status from 2019 to 2020. Again, so other things to note about institutional aid. So this is coming directly from the college or university, and it is not transferable to another college or university. So in my example, if a student applies to the University of Arizona and they receive a financial aid package with a scholarship, this scholarship would be in the form of essentially tuition discounting, and that would only be applicable to the University of Arizona. Okay. So private aid scholarships, where to get it? So scholarships that are not coming directly from a college or university are coming from a private source. Usually these institutions are think tanks, civic organizations, other philanthropic organizations that are providing, a scholarship for a particular kind of student. The benefit of private aid is that in most instances, it's not available, it's available to more than just one school. So if you're deciding between the University of Arizona and the University of Michigan, likely if you apply for and receive a scholarship from a private organization, it would be applicable to either of those colleges or universities. What I like to tell students is that private aid is sort of the great way that students can fill the gap between institutional aid that they might receive, and then any federal loans. Private aid can sometimes fill that gap where you're thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this financially. It also provides a way to, even if you are able to qualify for all the loans that you need, private aid is great because you're not accruing interest on that loan. So anything that you can do to reduce the size of your loan, be it institutional aid, private aid, all of the above are helpful to you. So I know that folks have, your next question is, well, where do I get all of this aid? Where is all of this money? So where to find scholarships? Petersons.com, we have over $13 billion in private aid listed on our website. So write that down, Petersons.com. One of the other great things about the scholarships that we have available on our website is that they have all been validated to ensure that there are no scams. These are all legitimate scholarship offers. Also, they're all private aid. This is not something that's applicable to just one individual university. Just to be transparent, I want to provide some other great resources for students to find scholarships. So Scholarship Owl is another great website, capex.com. And then another thing that I think students will be very interested in is use the internet and use social media to your advantage. I have had good experience. I've had students that say that they created a Google search around scholarships, and they created that search to ping them every day or every week about scholarships that they have found on Google. Also use Twitter. So you can search Twitter. It's search engine optimizable, and you can search it for, hashtag scholarship, hashtag, let's see here, maybe it's STEM. So anything that, if you kind of combine scholarship with where your interests are, you can find a lot of good scholarships that way. The other thing that I always encourage folks to do is to research any affiliations that you or your family may have. So that would be things like civic organizations, if there's anyone in your family with a military background, sometimes places where parents work, or even if a student has a part-time job. Those are great things. Clubs and organizations that students might be involved with in high school, like Key Club or Kiwanis. Also, any interests that students have. So if you know that you are interested in electrical engineering, look for organizations around that particular interest, because many times the scholarships that civic organizations are giving out are they want to give it out to somebody who's similar to them, who's following in their footsteps, who has the same sort of interests and passions. So that's a good place for me to transition over to Becky, and she's gonna add on this and give you some other tips and tricks about how you can maximize your search for institutional aid. And again, hold those questions, and I will be happy to answer those in the Q&A session. So Becky, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad
you. My screen. There we go.
Oh, there we go. I am so glad you found our session today. I know you have a lot of questions. I see them scrolling by. I've answered a couple, but make sure to understand that at the end we will take care of as many questions as we have time for. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen with you, and we're going to talk about what Elizabeth has brought up in a few more details. So this presentation moves into some specific tips about saving money on your tuition. The first tip is a huge myth buster. We've all learned growing up that if you go to school out of state, you're going to spend a lot more money. Well, that's not necessarily the truth. There are quite a few regional tuition exchange program universities and colleges, actually two-year colleges as well, that will actually give you a pretty good cost saving. So what are they? Regional tuition programs are basically as you live in a particular region of the country, and in that region are some consortium states and institutions, typically public, who will offer you tuition discounts. So if you're in one of the adjacent states or in a regional state area, you will get to save money. You won't pay the full out-of-state tuition. Which regions are included? There are 4 regions, which we're going to take a look at shortly to see which states belong to each region, but they are basically the West, the Midwest, the South, and the Northeast or New England area. What type of institutions participate? As I mentioned, mostly public, but a few private schools actually participate in this. Do all majors qualify? Not all majors qualify. The more impacted the major or popular the major, the less likely it would be included in the regional exchange program. And how do I learn more? Well, I am so glad you asked that question. So let's take a look. So tuition is never more than 150% of in-state tuition. So for example, I am a California retired counselor, just retired since June, and my daughter went out of state to Arizona. She paid, we paid 150% of the in-state tuition, and I'm going to give you a chart to kind of let you see what that actually looks like. There are other colleges and universities where that are in a different state than your home state, and you'll pay no out-of-state tuition. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of 2- and 4-year universities. And it's important to understand that room and board costs actually can be less in a different state. The programs tend to be less impacted, and popular majors can be less impacted. If they offer the major under their reciprocity agreement or their regional tuition exchange agreement, that means that particular major or program has capacity. Because of that, you have a better chance of finishing on time. Many more students, depending on how impacted your local universities are, many more students will finish quicker by going out of state to a less impacted university. And there are about 40 states that participate. And again, most of the institutions are public institutions. So here they are, the 4 regional tuition discount programs. First one is WUI. That's the Western Undergraduate Exchange. The reason I haven't included websites is all you have to do is Google WUI and it'll come up pretty quickly. These are the states that are included in the WUI program. Again, what this means is if you live in one of these states, for example, if you live in Washington, you can go to school in Montana or Nevada or Arizona and pay a reduced tuition fee. In some cases, the tuition out of state is less money than the tuition you'd pay at your home local university. The second program is the Midwest Exchange Program. And these are the states that are included in this program. You can read them there. Again, this wouldn't apply to if you live, let's say, in Arizona and you wanted to go to Illinois. It applies when you are going to a state within your own region. So Illinois goes to North Dakota or Missouri goes to Minnesota. So it's within your own region. The other 2 are the SREB or Southern Regional Education. You see the states included there. And finally, the New England Consortium, and it's Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Now, some of you are going, wait a second here. I'm from Ohio or Pennsylvania, and I haven't seen my state. That doesn't mean there isn't an agreement that exists. It just means they're not part of the big 4 agreed upon regional tuition discount programs. So let's see some examples here. And these are some popular student choices in the West. Washington State University, in-state tuition is $10,000. If you go with not using one of these programs as an out-of-state resident, you would pay $24,500. But if you go with WUI, you're going to only pay $15,000. So you can kind of see how half of $10,000 is about $5,000. That's where it gets you to that $15,000 WUI tuition rate. Colorado State, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Reno both participate in this program, and Northern Arizona University as well. There are many more. One thing to consider is certain states and certain programs are going to have minimum GPAs or minimum test scores or maybe an earlier deadline than others. So what are your next steps? If you're interested in one of these 4 programs, your next steps are to visit the exchange based on where you live. Make sure when you get to the site, search by colleges, majors, programs. There's all different ways to search. Make sure if the major shows up, you understand that means it's eligible. If you search for a common major, let's say nursing, and it doesn't show up, that probably means that they don't include nursing in the exchange tuition related program for that particular institution. Make sure again to check application due dates. Is there a minimum GPA? Is there a minimum scores or deadlines for that? Some states and some schools require individual applications. In many places, as long as you apply, you are going to automatically be considered for that exchange program. But others say, okay, hold on, are you interested? Are you interested? If you are, make sure to fill out an application. And as Elizabeth very clearly stated, always fill out the FAFSA, because some schools do use it for merit aid. Some use it just to kind of establish a starting point for you. So the FAFSA is important to fill out. It now is opening as of October 1st, and it's a prior year. So for example, this year's FAFSA would take your income tax information from 2018, no longer from last year, but 2018. Obviously, a lot of us have had changes in our financial circumstances, and we're going to talk about what to do, go into a little bit more detail regarding how to handle that. Insider tip number 2, merit aid. A lot of you I saw on the chat were asking questions about merit aid. Basically, merit aid is not need aid. Merit aid just simply looks at how strong of credentials do you have for our particular institution. So this is money you don't have to pay back. It's institutional money, it's merit aid or scholarship money that is based on your academic profile. Typically, that is your GPA and test scores. And we're going to talk a little bit about test optional, so you have an understanding of how that might be used or not used in test optional schools for merit aid. So first of all, you want to consider the schools for merit aid where you are in the top 10 to 20%. Some schools dig a little deeper, maybe take the top 25 or 30% of applicants. And remember that your profile for one school might be very strong, but for another school, you might not be in the top 10 to 20%. And merit aid typically is based on, as I mentioned, GPA and test scores. So here's a couple of awesome examples. These happen to be members of the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. Boise State, you have a 3.0 and a 990 SAT or a commensurate ACT, and they will give you $7,000 a year of merit money. 990 is a little below average. It's very doable for a lot of kids, so here's an idea. Now, if your SAT score is a little bit higher, 1060 and a 3.2 GPA, that money bumps up from $7,000 per year to $12,000 per year, and that's what their WUI scholarship looks like. University of New Mexico, one of my all-time favorites, a 990 SAT and a 3.0 GPA will get you a $12,000 scholarship per year. That's more than $50,000 or almost $50,000 per year. If you have an 1100 SAT and at least a 3.0, that could be $15,000 a year or $60,000 all told. University of New Mexico is a flagship campus, and they're not paying me to say this. They are an awesome university, and they already, I found out just this morning from the rep, that their 2021 application is already open for the University of New Mexico. So tip number 3 is an incredibly important tip. This will relate to your being financially in a good place, we hope. You have to create a balanced college list. All of you students who are watching this today, really sit down and think about, what does my balanced college list look like? If it is balanced, it's going to have 3 categories: reach, target, and likely. A reach school might be a school where you're slightly or somewhat under the typical academic profile, and I'm going to show you where to find out where you lie in the academic profile. A target should be a number of schools. That should be the biggest group of schools on your 3-tiered list. And those would be schools where you match the typical freshman entrance requirements, rigor, your GPA, and if needed, test scores. If a school has less than a 25% admit rate, though, that's something that's difficult for students to be considered, to consider as a target, because even with a 25% admit rate, they are still turning away or not accepting students that might be toward the top of their class. So just understand that anything with less than a 25% admit rate should probably, in most cases, be considered a reach. And finally, likely, which we used to call safety, but sometimes it was hard to predict, so a safety school is now considered a likely school. This is a school where you exceed the profile, academic profile of the typical entering freshman. Remember, as we mentioned before, some majors are impacted, so majors can matter. The more competitive or impacted or full that major is, the higher your grades, your rigor, and your test scores may need to be in order to gain entrance. So you want to think fit. Think about, is it an academic fit for me? Is it a financial fit? Can we really afford to do this after we look at the merit aid? Or if there's no merit aid received, how about financially need-based aid? Is this a school that we can actually afford? And then your personal values and culture. Are you going to want to be in a rural setting, urban, a suburban, a liberal, a conservative? Do you want a faith-based school? So that's where your personal values and choices come into play. One last note, especially if you're applying to any liberal arts schools or smaller private schools, or sometimes even large private schools, they want to know that you're interested ahead of time before that application arrives in their inbox. So one way to do that is to demonstrate your interest. These days, you can't do actual tours, right? So there's a lot of opportunities for virtual tours. In fact, today with Go to College Fairs, they have a college fair going on. I visited that fair yesterday and talked to several representatives virtually. It was very interesting and very informative. So you can visit that way. You also want to get on email lists, and then make sure you open the emails, because they actually pay attention in many cases to if you clicked on anything, if you actually open the email. Follow them on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So you make sure that you show multiple ways that you're interested. And the way we found this come into play is if I have two students, happened to me last year when I was a counselor. One student had a slightly better profile. He was not accepted into a university that his friend was accepted into, even though his profile was slightly lower. And it was because this student all along has demonstrated interest in that particular institution. Tip number 4, do your research. So there's some great sites. The first one is College Navigator. It's the government site. If you find the College Navigator, that's a private college prep site. So the government site is called College Navigator. You can look up academic profiles to see what's the average SAT, ACT scores, what the % of acceptance rates are, etc. So that's a good way to kind of see where you fall academically for competitiveness for that university. Also, if you want to get really into it, you can Google the name of the institution and the common data set to understand what their endowments look like, the average amount of need that is given to students, first-time freshmen. CollegeFactual.com, there's a cost cutter tool where you can compare awards. I think that's a pretty fantastic site. Every school by law is required to have what's called a net price calculator. You put in your information, and what pops up is an estimate, not really the full calculation, but an estimate of what you might expect to pay attending that particular college. Make sure not to forget to go to college and regional websites, and studentaid.gov will answer a lot of the questions I saw on the chat just now. Again, we'll get to as many as we can at the end. That's a good site for all things financial aid, government-related, FAFSA, Pell Grants, etc. So some tips, specific tips I'd like to talk to you about related to COVID-19. First of all, Elizabeth really highlighted, and I want to say it once again in case you're late in joining, make sure if you've had a change in your financial circumstances that you complete a special circumstances request. Some schools call that by a different name, but that is something that it's almost like doing an appeal with the financial aid office. And the financial aid office can actually go in and change up your FAFSA and change your EFC, which is your estimated family contribution, based on more recent information. Obviously, you're going to have supporting documentation, but make sure not to ignore doing that. I just talked to the financial aid coordinator at a large university yesterday, and she told me, she says, we want to talk to these people one-on-one, and we want to understand what's changed in their financial circumstances. Also, you want to explore the pros and cons of a gap year or a deferral or going to community college. A gap year means you're taking a year off before you go to school, you're not applying yet. Hopefully doing something philanthropic or unique or even working to get experience. Maybe it's going to be an internship. A deferral means you applied, you were accepted, and you're going to ask that university to defer for up to a year at a time. Usually it's 1 year total. That can actually, though, a deferral, affect the kind of aid you get, because a lot of scholarships are geared toward having you as you walk in the door as a first-year student. So sometimes having a deferral might change the equation as far as you getting the same amount of merit aid or scholarship money. And then a community college is a great option to save money, obviously. In many states, including California, community college, as long as you fill out the FAFSA, there's a community college promise, and it's now tuition free if you go full-time straight from high school without a gap year, straight from high school. Be careful though, because once you take community college classes after graduation, some universities no longer consider you to be a first-time freshman. So you really need to do your research. Each school's a little bit different, and a lot of things are changing even as we speak due to uncertainty about the fall and maybe spring semester due to COVID-19. CLEP exams. So here's a surprise. CLEP exam is not an AP test, but it's basically a test that you pay for. It's a lot less than taking the class. If there are subjects that you're really strong in, you could look at taking a CLEP exam and test out of the class, and that will save you money. Again, Google CLEP. You can Google that along with the institutional name, and you'll be able to see what CLEP exams exist. If you're in some dire financial straits, never hesitate to ask the representative or the school for an application fee waiver or a test fee waiver. Test fee waivers, you're going to have a little bit more proof, but I've found many kids, and I've helped kids talk to college reps, explain their situation, and they've offered them a free application versus having to pay an application fee anywhere from $25 to $50 to $75 to $100 per application. Don't assume that your educational plan will match the university's policy. I heard a parent talking the other day about sending their student to a community college for a semester and then having them go to the university. That is not something that's very likely, but you need to talk to each individual university. And if they're hurting for students, I already heard that we're down about 25% as far as college acceptances at this point. They may work with you, but always investigate. Every college is a little bit different. Colleges really do need students. Applications in many cases are still open. Yesterday, UNLV told me that their application is open until July 1st. And as I mentioned with University of New Mexico, their application is open still, and even next year's application for 2021 is wide open. If dorms are closed, if campus is closed, if instruction begins online, make sure you understand that this too will pass. It's not forever, and a semester or could be 2 of online instruction might work out. You have to decide the pros and cons to whether that's the experience you want, but remember, it won't be all 4 years, we hope, right? Finally, keep informed and do your research. So I just want to tell you that as a counselor, retired counselor, I feel so strongly about telling you about your more than a test score. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of schools now. I believe it's over 1,000. You can find out on fairtest.org that are test optional for entrance. Remember that test optional for admissions does not necessarily mean that their merit aid scholarship money would be test optional. Most of them, especially if they've just transferred from requiring SAT or ACT scores to test optional, they're in a situation where they may not have anything set up for merit aid yet, or are still filling that out as far as how will we award merit aid if we're suddenly now test optional, but something to look into. There are over 3,000 colleges in the US. Please don't get stuck on the top 40 sweatshirt schools. You want to maximize your yeses. In other words, apply to a variety of schools, especially target schools like we talked about earlier. If they're saying yes to you and they really want you to come, they're going to offer you typically some merit aid if they have that money available. Again, make sure to see what your academic profile is compared to the typical freshman applicant. And what you do in college, I believe, is more important than what college you go to, or where you go, or how you go to college. Consider out-of-state colleges to be a really important part of a balanced college list, now that you know that out-of-state colleges don't necessarily have to be more expensive than an in-state university, especially if you finish in 4 years versus 5 or 6, which in some places is very typical. Talk to your school counselor, whether it's by phone, by email, Google Chat, whatever it is. Talk to your counselor, because you know what? They know a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and Becky, thank you so much. This is Elizabeth. I just wanted to clear up one quick question that was my fault that I need to clarify. I'm already in the frame of mind thinking about next year.
Yeah.
And so when I mentioned 2019 tax returns, so let me go ahead and be clear. If you are a current senior, so if you are in high school right now and you are a current senior, you would use the 2018 tax returns. If you are a current junior, you would use 2019 tax returns, and so on and so forth.
Thank you for clarifying that. And that's a very important piece to look at. You're a senior, it's one thing. You're a junior, you're looking ahead. That's definitely 2019. So what we're going to do now is we are going to look at some FAQs And these FAQs, and I will head back over there, are some questions that we put together as we thought about this presentation. So first of all, if a university is test optional, will test scores still be considered for determining merit aid? We discussed that. This is still likely. Please check each institution. Will taking community college classes after high school graduation affect my students' ability to be awarded merit aid at a four-year university? Probably. It's going to depend on each school's policy. Since the FAFSA looks at prior tax year, should we send in current information based on income change due to COVID-19? Absolutely. Both Elizabeth and I both talked about that. We want to stress that with you. That's very important. If my student attends a WUI, an MSEP, or another regional exchange program for at least 1 year, will he or she be able to secure in-state tuition? This is always the big question I get when I make this presentation, and it's very unlikely. Unfortunately, no. They use WUI or SREP or the other regional programs in order to kind of have a little bit more income or tuition money coming in. So once you're living there, they typically don't let you become a resident unless you take a year out of that school. And every state's a little different, but it's, don't think if I send my student out of state after their first year there, they'll become a resident. That's, I've seen very few cases like that. It's highly unlikely that that will happen. Okay, Alex, I'm going to let you start monitoring and talking to us about questions, and we'll start.
All right, excellent. So just to start off, you know, I was monitoring the chat, and thank you both for also jumping in and answering some questions as you were passing through and passing along the torch to one another. So I appreciate you jumping on and answering questions. So a lot of common questions we're getting are things like, for this one, for example, will a college judge you or base your acceptance on how much aid you get?
I can take that. It might be a question about whether they're need aware or need blind. So that means if they're need blind, they accept you regardless. They don't know, they're not looking, they don't care if you are going to bring in, if you're going to have need or if you're going to be a full pay. Other institutions are quite the opposite. They are need aware. A lot of times you see that come into play with who gets off a waiting list.
Okay, thank you. This next question I have, and again, it was a common one just regarding the timeline for FAFSA. When does the FAFSA open each year for completion and submission?
I can take that too. It opens October 1st, and this is a change that happened a few years ago, so it's different from when we were used to having it open January 1st, but now it's October 1st. And it closes July 1st. There are priority deadlines though, for example, in certain states, for example, in California, your priority deadline is March 2nd, because there's also state aid or what we call Cal grants. And there's grants, a lot of states have grants, and so they might have an earlier deadline than that July 1st. But when it opens October 1st, absolutely should hop right on it. Seniors, it's still open right now for you to take the FAFSA. Don't let it go. It's really important. It really governs a lot of different decision making, and most universities are going to want to look at that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This next question is regarding the COVID-19 specifically. Due to COVID-19, do you think that there will be less federal aid / scholarships available for students to receive? And again, this is open for both of your opinions and your thoughts on that.
Well, so I actually, I would say no. I mean, we can always be wrong. We don't know anything until it actually happens. But so applying for the FAFSA is basically applying for your eligibility for federal aid. And I think we've seen in, the past 6-8 weeks that the federal government is very committed to providing aid to both individuals, corporations, and I would be very, very surprised if they would reduce their support of educational loans.
Thank you so much. And just moving right along here, if you receive institutional and private aid, is the total amount awarded valid, or do you need to choose one of the two options?
So I can take that. So institutional and private aid is, they are completely separate. So the way that I like to think of it is that you need to look at it institution by institution. So private aid would apply to whichever institutions, it would apply to basically whatever institutions would qualify for the particular stipulations on that private aid. For example, if you got a scholarship from Key Club and it's for, $2,000 to any four-year institution, as long as it's a four-year institution, they will pay out that scholarship. That would be on top of whatever you receive from each individual university. So if you got $10,000 from University A, you would essentially have a total of $12,000. If you got $5,000 from institution B, you would essentially have, $7,000 in a tuition reduction.
And I would add that it's always important, as Elizabeth said, to look at individual places, because sometimes they will allow you, that's called stacking. They'll allow you to stack the scholarship money. And in other cases, I have heard of some who will say, well, we might reduce it. Again, that's a tough question because each individual institution is going to look at that in their own way. Again, we're in COVID-19, everything's up in the air. They really need students. I think it would probably be less likely that that will happen now than maybe if it would have happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you both so much. Moving right along here and just covering private scholarships a little bit. Approximately what year in high school should I start applying for private scholarships? Is there a timetable that's ideal for students?
Sure. I would say, so that's a kind of a little bit of a tricky question. I would start researching as soon as possible. One of the things that I tell students is that for these private scholarships, usually the criteria is the same from year to year to year because we're just all creatures of habit. So even if you're a freshman, you can start researching scholarships, and if you know that you would qualify, say in your senior year for that scholarship, you can go ahead and start working on essays and start basically researching things that you would be qualified for in the coming years. Essays take a lot of time to write, so I think the more that you can get a leg up on that, the better. But usually scholarships will actually be awarded to incoming freshmen, college freshmen. Mm-hmm. So you would be applying essentially your senior year.
Yeah, and that's very true. There are just a handful that I've found over the years that are for current juniors, very rare. So Elizabeth is spot on that. And I will tell you something I noticed. There's two things about scholarships. The more local the scholarship, the more you should really go for it because there are less applicants. Those national scholarships, everybody is applying for those. And then also I've noticed that scholarships that do require an essay, because they take more time, sometimes have less applicants, and it might be a little easier to get a scholarship where there is a more elongated or an essay that's involved in that scholarship.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, I do have some people asking about internationally for students. So this question comes in, and can international students be eligible for financial aid, and how they can file for FAFSA?
Do you want me to take that, Elizabeth, or do you want to take it?
Either way.
Okay, so I think we'll both take it.
Okay.
Yeah, international students, there's always that big question. That's a whole other world. And the institution is going to make some determinations what scholarships they have available or merit aid for international students. Quite interestingly enough, the FAFSA, if you complete the FAFSA, a lot of your awards you can take with you out of the country to Canada, for example, which is something kind of interesting to know. So it's a whole different world with international students, and we hate to keep saying check with the institution, but it really is going to be institution dependent. The FAFSA is for students who are residents. So an international student would not be a resident if they're an international student. Would you like to add something,
to piggyback on that, Becky is absolutely right. If the student is a U.S. citizen, but the parents are not, you should still apply for FAFSA.
Yes, good.
Excellent.
And that's true of just documentation. If you're undocumented, you're a dreamer. Again, your parents, even if they're not documented, they can put 000 in the Social Security area, where you have to put the Social Security number. But if you're born here, or you're a citizen, or you're a resident, any of those categories, you can apply and qualify for FAFSA.
Yes, so it's student-centric, it doesn't have any relation to the parent.
Yes.
Excellent, okay. Now I do have a question here regarding early decisions. If my child applies early decision, should the FAFSA be filled out early as well? I'm assuming at the same time as applying for early decision.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Now I'm just going to scroll through chat here. You both done an excellent job answering the majority of my questions. So I'm just going to gather some more from the chat here. Can scholarships help pay for your room and board if you already have your tuition paid for?
I would say that is dependent on the particular scholarship. In most cases, yes. Most places that are offering scholarships are offering the scholarship for any sort of fee that the student would incur by going to college. So that might be room and board. It also might be fees or textbooks.
Excellent. Okay. Now I have a question here regarding regional tuition exchange. Do you have to apply every year in college for the regional tuition exchange programs if you apply the first year?
What a great question. I have found that that's not typically the case. Anytime you say that, though, there are always exceptions, but it is not typically the case. Once you're established as a regional admit, then you stay that. Typically, there are minimum GPAs, though, required for you to be able to continue with that tuition discount or scholarship. Believe it or not, there actually, here's another surprise, there are some colleges that will let you keep the tuition amount the same. Whatever your tuition was in your first year for or any of those regional programs, they'll keep it the same for all 4 years. I've even seen it go as long as 6 years. It's rare, but that's kind of a nice hedge against inflation, right?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Becky. And then just, this will be our last question for the afternoon. I do have some people asking about Pell Grants. Are Pell Grants given based on financial need, or is it something else?
Great question. Pell Grants are given based on financial need. And that's why they're basically, students are automatically sort of applied for them when they fill out the FAFSA.
Excellent. All right. Now we do have a little bit of time for a couple of extra questions, so let me squeeze some in here. If my parents' finances are reduced after freshman year, can I resubmit the FAFSA?
Yes.
You do it every year.
Guess what? You have to redo it every single year. So yeah.
So once you get your FAFSA ID and your password, keep track of that, because that's yours forever. And your parents get one, parent gets one, they keep that too. So hang on to those. You use it every single year. Great question. And I wished I had reminded you guys of that. Every year you have to fill it out.
All right. Okay. And then just one last question here. Would you fill out the FAFSA if your parents are not citizens and you're a student is also not citizen? So I'm assuming this regards an international. If you're international all the way through, are you going to be able to apply for scholarships and FAFSA as well?
If you are not a resident or a citizen, and your parents are also not a resident or citizen, that filling out the FAFSA is probably not going to be worth your while. However, each individual institution can determine how they will assess the needs of that particular family. And then the other thing that I would have mentioned is that private scholarships, can be available to international students. And then also, merit aid at the individual institution can also be available to international students. Becky, is there anything else that you would add?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Remember, we have the DREAM Act, so there are some other, and DACA, so there are some other ways of it approaching this. Not knowing where you're coming from, I think Elizabeth pretty much covered it.
Excellent. All right, well, that is all the time that we have today. I want to thank both my panelists for coming on and giving this presentation. You both did an excellent, lovely job. For everyone who attended, thank you so much. I'm sure they're all giving you a virtual round of applause. You both did excellent, and you were able to answer a lot of questions, so I know that everyone's appreciative of that. Just a reminder for everyone, and Becky had mentioned this earlier, you can explore your college options in our virtual college fair. We have hundreds of interactive virtual booths where you can watch videos, download material, and chat with admission representatives from that institution. You also find that some booths have scheduled their own live stream presentations, so make sure you check that out if you have an opportunity. That does conclude our presentation on Clear as Mud, a guide to understanding and comparing financial assistance and awards. Thank you once again to both my panelists, Becky, Elizabeth. You both did an excellent job, and I hope that everybody stays safe and healthy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.